Hi, this is Kirby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
But now we have in studio with us, great to have him right across the table from me, Kevin Freeman, who has been on this show before, but I want to just give a brief introduction because I didn't get a chance before the break. But Kevin Freeman is, first of all, what we're going to talk about to start with is his book, Secret Weapon: How Economic Terrorism Brought Down the U.S. Stock Market and Why It Can Happen Again. Honestly, I read this book, and I honestly had no idea about these things. I've actually known Kevin for several years. I know many of his colleagues, and just had not realized the extent to which actual enemy conduct, terroristic conduct, contributed to the September 2008 stock market disaster. So we're going to talk about that, and not just what happened then, but could it happen again and how it happens. And then we're going to go off a bunch of other topics too, but I want to say welcome to Kevin Freeman. Hi.
Thank you, Debbie. It's great to be here.
Glad you're here. Well, as I said, I'm sorry, I want to give a bit more introduction of you, just because I want our listeners to know who we have. It's a fabulous guest to be able to have with us. He's considered one of the world's leading experts on the issues of economic warfare and financial terrorism. He's consulted with and briefed U.S. House members and the U.S. Senate, all sorts of the alphabet agencies, the CIA, the DIA, the FBI. He has done research for the Department of Justice on economic warfare. He's a really international expert on understanding this issue of economic warfare, which I think most people are not necessarily tuned into. So, I guess I want to start with your book, your Secret Weapon: How Economic Terrorism Brought Down the U.S. Stock Market. And, just lay it out for people who haven't ever heard this idea before. How could a foreign actor, an enemy, bring about or harm the U.S. the stock market?
Well, just stop and think. You had General Flynn as your previous guest. Brilliant man, was the head of the DIA. In fact, he was one of my favorite briefings that I got to do, as I went in and spoke for General Flynn to the Defense Intelligence Agency. But just keep in mind that while we have a lot of brilliant people on our side in the Pentagon thinking about new weapons and new ways that we can bunker bust with bombs, new fighter jets, new aircraft carriers, and so forth, our enemies realize that our defense budget is a multiple of the rest of the world's total combined defense budget. Now, a lot of it's wasted. It's wasted in bureaucracy. It's wasted in a lot of areas. But we still spend more money on weapons than any other nation. If you want to attack the United States, you have to stop and think like the Chinese did when they published the book Unrestricted Warfare in 1999. They said, we'll never beat America head-to-head in a military conflict. What we can do is undermine America. And we can undermine the culture. We can undermine through environmental rules. We can undermine through institutions like the United Nations. And ultimately, if we want to take them down, we'll take them down using techniques of this man named George Soros, who they likened to a financial terrorist. They said he was equal in impact to Osama bin Laden. And they learned from him, and they said a single man-made stock market crash is one of the ultimate weapons to taking down America. So think from that perspective. If you don't want to attack us militarily, you don't want to exchange nuclear weapons, how do you take America down? You infiltrate the stock market, and you cause people to lose their pensions. You cause corporations to lose their profitability. You basically destroy the economy, and there's little chance of retaliation.
Okay, well, that's already bad news, but I want to just, for people who aren't, including myself, not particularly sophisticated, and we trade in the stock market, we have some investments there, but how does a foreign person, what exactly do they do to infiltrate the stock market?
Well, I'll give you the most obvious and direct way in today's technology. You recall that not long ago, Delta Airlines had their computer glitch, and they had problems, and they weren't able to keep all the reservations. It caused chaos at airports around the world. Southwest Airlines had their version of that glitch also. You could hack the system, just like the Democrat National Committee was hacked, just like the Office of Personnel Management of the government was hacked, just like the White House. You hack the stock market, and you take down the stock market, or you manipulate trading, or you change ownership inside the market. Basically, computer technology allows foreign nations to hack our stock market. And this isn't just my opinion. This was said by General Keith Alexander when he was the head of the NSA. He was interviewed on 60 Minutes. It was about 3 years ago, near Christmas time. And the writer in Forbes who saw that said, if America realized this, the stock market would start going down right now. America didn't realize it. But he said a foreign national could hack our stock exchange and take down our financial system. And who could do that? Well, China and one or two others.
So back just for a moment to focus in on September of 2008, which was, of course, a disastrous time in the American stock market. What foreign players, through your research, you've extensively researched this, who is involved in that?
Well, there's no doubt that there were foreign players involved. In fact, one of them was admitted by Hank Paulson, the Treasury Secretary, in his memoir, On the Brink, and he later said it in interviews. He doesn't talk about it much, but in 2008 in the summer, when we were having a housing bubble burst and we were having Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac on the ropes, those were quasi-government entities backed by the taxpayer, Russia approached China and said, if we dump all our holdings of Fannie and Freddie, we can bankrupt them and force the government to bail them out and collapse the American economy. Now, fortunately, Russia was interested and did do that. Fortunately, China did not. At that time, China was more interested in seeing the American economy continue because they wanted us to buy their goods that they were producing, and they wanted their economic miracle to continue. But Russia was involved, and they did attack. And right now, when you consider that about $6 or $7 trillion of our bonds are held by foreigners, if they were to dump those to harm America, it'd be the end of our economy.
Okay, so you're an expert in this and international finance, and you research extensively. But I feel like I hear these things from you, and I just feel like I don't think many Americans understand it. And I also wonder how many in our government understand it. I mean, you've testified before these agencies. Do you feel like people in Washington, in leadership positions, are they aware of this? Like, do they know we have a serious problem that we have to address?
For the most part, the average congressman, congresswoman, bureau head, for the most part, they ignore it because it's unthinkable. We can't even imagine that. And they go back to the idea of mutually assured destruction. And they said, nobody was, the Soviet Union and America, we wouldn't drop bombs on each other because that would kill us too. And they assumed that China would be harmed so much that there's no way that they would do something like that to destroy our economy.
We're speaking. This is Debbie Georgatos. I am sitting in for the Vacation Kirby Anderson on Point of View, and we have as our guest this hour Kevin Freeman, author of Secret Weapon, How Economic Terrorism Brought Down the Stock Market. I can't tell you, listeners, how important this is to follow this, not just because it's interesting to learn about, but because it's one of the ways voters and Americans have to protect our future. So come back. We're going to keep on talking with Kevin Freeman.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
And welcome back to Point of View Radio. This is Debbie Georgatos sitting in for Kirby Anderson. We have a guest in studio today, Kevin Freeman. And I mentioned when we started talking the last segment, it's important to recognize when you hear Kevin Freeman's assessment and words and the history he understands, he is one of the world's leading experts on the issues of economic warfare and financial terrorism. And I think this is a topic where we had in our first hour General Flynn. Lots of people, if you pick up a newspaper or open the internet, you're aware of the danger posed to America by radical Islam. You're aware of the violence in Europe. You're aware of what's happening in the Middle East. You're aware of violence here in America by actual physical terrorism, guns and bombs, and even driving trucks in France. But unaware, I think that many people may not be aware enough of how there are other means that our enemies could use to harm America. And we were talking before the break about how we all, or many of us, I did until I read Kevin Freeman's book, Secret Weapon. I thought pretty much the September 2008 stock market collapse was really due to poor financial decisions. You mentioned Freddie Mae and Fannie. I'm saying backwards. Let's do that. Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. How we had overextended. We had made loans people who couldn't pay things back. Also, all the problems were just our own doing. But actually, you learn in this book, there was intentional economic terrorism, cyber economic terrorism against America as part of that collapse in 2008. So fast forwarding to now. So here we are, 2016. You've been working on this issue for quite a while. What are we doing in Washington to prevent this kind of cyber economic terrorism in the future?
You know, one of the funny things is the government has shown an interest in addressing this only recently because they realize that the stock market collapse always causes the party out of power to take power. And so in 2008, that was positive and beneficial. If you're a Democrat, you wanted the Bushes gone, you wanted the Republicans gone, and you wanted to take power. Now there's this panic, and they're talking about, well, did Putin hack the DNC? And if he did, is he leaking information and so forth? Everybody's worried about cyber hacking today. 8 years ago, they didn't even discuss it, talk about it, think about it. What are we doing? Unfortunately, very little. We have very strong offensive cyber capabilities, but we arrogantly assume that no one would really attack us, particularly not attack us to take down our economy, particularly not attack us to we understand that they're attacking the Office of Personnel Management, OPM. And we say, oh, well, we'll just kind of ignore it. We've laid a red line in Syria, and we've laid a red line with the Chinese on hacking. They're crossing it repeatedly and doing it without any response from us.
You know, I've had the thought, and I'm sure others have too, and you alluded to it in the last segment about how you think the world kind of needs a strong America, and China owns so much of our debt. So, China would not benefit necessarily if America were to have a financial collapse. I mean, then, it's that old adage about who owns you. But getting back to where we are right now, you think, or people think, well, China wouldn't want us to collapse because they own all our debt. But these enemies could do all sorts of bad things to America, and all the usual logic would be thrown out the window. So back to specifics. So do we know things we could do, we don't do it? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, we know things that we could do and don't do it for political reasons because there's no agency that is focused on economic warfare in the government. So I'd go and talk to the Pentagon, and they'd say, that's not in our swimming lanes. Go talk to the FBI. Well, it's really more national security, not in our swimming lanes. We have some focus on this, but not, it's the same thing that Hillary Clinton and her server put national security at risk from a cyber means. And there was nothing really in the government forcing that to bring it into government and protect it properly. It's just, we're just not prepared for it.
So do we need something like a Department of Economic Warfare or an agency or of some kind?
We had a Department of Economic Warfare under President Roosevelt during World War II. I did not know that. And the Germans understood economic warfare. They printed an enormous amount of British currency, and they were going to drop it over London. They didn't get to do it. They actually got stopped in doing it, and they went a different direction. But they spent a lot of time preparing, and there's a great film about this. It's not in English, but it's an incredible film called The Counterfeiters. The North Koreans are counterfeiting our money now. But we just assume our economy is so strong and so big that it doesn't matter if they counterfeit $100 billion worth of currency and leak it to the world. So it's American arrogance. We assume that everybody loves our way of life and our system. What we don't realize is President Xi in China is telling everyone we need to return to our Marxist roots. And we say, oh, there's no way. They've tasted capitalism. There's no way they'll ever. You know what? Go on a university campus and poll 50 young people you see there. If we can't convince our own young people that capitalism is superior to Marxism, how do you think the communist Chinese are going to think?
I did not realize that was kind of a political trend in China, you're saying, or at least at the leadership level.
She is pushing for a return to Marxism.
Wow. We could go off many tangents on this, but this has troubled me, this election cycle, that we had so many young people lured in by Bernie Sanders, who at least had the integrity to say, yes, I'm a Democrat socialist. He's admitting he embraces socialism. To my sense, much of the policies embraced by the Democrat Party, they are socialistic in nature in their background ideology, but they are wise enough not to call it that. We're going to get to the point where they're not even in America afraid to call it that, because socialism is kind of rising as a trendy, friendly thing.
Well, the Communist Party has already endorsed Secretary Clinton for president. They're very open about it. They're declaring it, and there's no walk away from that. There's no, we're not communist. Thank you for your endorsement. We don't want it, which was demanded of Mr. Trump multiple times. But they're embracing it.
Wow, I want to go back on this whole hacking thing. I'm just so glad we're focusing, and I love focusing on what dangers we have. And then, because I do think America is resourceful, we are intelligent, we just have to have the will. We have to have the will to fight things that are happening. And, this whole hacking of Hillary Clinton's emails in this election cycle, or the news has happened this election cycle, is kind of waking people up to that, we can have all sorts of physical security at the border, and we can have strong military forces, but we have to be electronically militarily strong too, or we have to use our intelligence and our abilities to protect against hacking. You mentioned a minute ago about George Soros, and I honestly haven't followed the story as much as it sounds like you have, but George Soros got hacked, and there was a release of his emails by WikiLeaks. And we have like 3 minutes, so you can kind of go with it, if you would, about what is it that came out about Soros that was really that people should know.
Well, we know that he was funding movements like Black Lives Matter and protests in Ferguson. And those had been reported on, but they'd never been confirmed. We now have confirmation. We know that he was funding opposition research on people like our mutual friend Frank Gaffney, that they were trying to destroy Frank Gaffney. Why? Because he was warning about the dangers of radical Islam and how radical Islamists could come across the border and infiltrate this country. And so Soros had orders to take him down. We know that he was funding the breakdown of borders. He's very anti-borders. In Europe, he was promoting bringing in as many refugees as possible. We also know that he was funding Mrs. Clinton, and he was giving her specific orders when she was at Secretary of State. There were demands that were made. We know that he was disappointed in President Obama that he didn't follow through as much as he'd wanted. We know that he was funding the immigration crisis in Europe, and then he was betting against European stocks as the turmoil and chaos emerged, and he was funding efforts to take coal out of the American energy equation, which killed the coal stocks, and at the same time he was waiting till coal hit rock bottom and went in and bought coal stocks. He was fermenting chaos, and then he was profiting from it.
Okay, well, you did laundry list. Our listeners, if you're not watching on the video, you're just listening. I'm madly trying to write a list of everything Kevin Freeman, our guest today, was talking about, of all the things that came out based on George Soros' emails being hacked. I mean, I'm almost, in this case, I want to say thank goodness for hackers, or yay for hackers, because you wouldn't know all these things. And you're right, there was so much commentary during the Ferguson riots, during Occupy Wall Street, now with respect to the Black Lives Matter movement, that George Soros was kind of dark money behind it, and it had an evil, sinister air. And all of the spokesmen for all those groups would just look you right in the face and say, what are you talking about? This is organic. This is a natural response to the terrible condition we're in America. And so, and people didn't like this, being that the suggestion was being funded by someone so anti-American as George Soros. And on the subject of George Soros, I do think it's very interesting how, we have complaints about funding or donors to Republican causes, to conservatives, but George Soros funds chaos and evil and destruction, and he is yet an open backer, and Hillary Clinton and many Democrats proudly tout his support and are proud that he is with them. I can't even name his organization. We have 5 seconds here. What is the name of the organization? You remember? Anyway, we'll come back after the break and talk about that. I have Kevin Freeman with me. This is Debbie Georgatos filling in for Kirby Anderson and Point of View. We got lots more to talk about.
And now, here again, your guest host for Point of View.
And welcome back to Point of View. This is Debbie Georgatos sitting in for the Vacationing Kirby Anderson. Love doing this. It's so much fun. And also it's fun because we have a great guest who's here in the studio with us today. Kevin Freeman. We've been talking about his book, Secret Weapon, the basic idea that in addition to all the other potential threats to America through just physical terrorism of, from the border or in all sorts of ways that we feel concerned about the I call it Islamic idea or conquest Islam. We also have to be concerned about enemies of all kinds able to hack into our economic our stock market and just wreak havoc in the stock market. But the king of that is George Soros, or kind of the king maker, the king player behind the scenes. And we were talking before our break about how it had turned out that WikiLeaks released emails that they had hacked into the Open Society, which is George Soros's kind of primary organization, as well as his personal emails, and confirmed what many have said on the conservative side for a long time, which is these really nasty, angry anti-American organizations or movements, if you want to call them that. But they had Occupy Wall Street and the Black Lives Matter and the Ferguson riots. They're funded by George Soros. They're not these organic movements that the people involved try to tell us. So I want to go back because Kevin's been reading about this much more than I have about George Soros's involvement in all of this. You mentioned something, and I'm going back to when you first came in the studio, I think, but it's not just that he hacks in to cause trouble or that he uses his money to cause trouble. He financially benefits from the chaos he creates.
Yes. He called it the theory of reflexivity. He wrote a book on that, and I read it in the 1980s, and I actually wrote about it in a newsletter that I was publishing at the time. And essentially, you cause a problem, and then you cause a problem that you can profit from. And a good example is, let's tell everybody how dirty coal is. Coal is horrible and evil. If you burn it, it will ruin our planet, and we can't have any more coal. And so you tell your politician, Secretary Clinton, go to West Virginia and tell the coal miners they're going to be out of work. Tell them we're going to close you down. And President Obama said, you can build a coal plant if you want, but we will bankrupt you if you do. And you put those economic threats out there. And you drive down the price of coal so that coal-producing states and coal companies can no longer stay in business. And then when they're completely on their back, you show up and you buy shares in Arch Coal or Peabody Coal, which he has done recently. And you buy as much as you can, and you literally take over the coal industry. And then what you can do is you can have your politicians decide to back off, and everybody, conservatives, will think they're getting a great victory. But in reality, they're just creating opportunity for you to make money. Same thing happened. No fracking, oil industry, we're going to stop all fracking. And then what happens? Warren Buffett makes a fortune when they don't approve the Keystone Pipeline through his railroad shipping oil from North Dakota down. Same kind of story. It makes billions of dollars for big Democratic donors.
This kind of stuff you're describing is infuriating. And I was thinking about when you're talking, how much of it is illegal or how much it just is clearly unethical and morally wrong, but how much of it is actually illegal? I mean, if it's not illegal for President Obama, for example, or Hillary Clinton to say they're against coal, it's very dirty, it's very awful, it's environmentally disastrous, so they drive down the price. But it seems like what Soros is doing in orchestrating it all has to get close to illegal. And I know you're not a lawyer, but it has to get close to illegal.
Yeah, I'm not a lawyer, but there might be some RICO charges or something, racketeering and so forth. But he's got great attorneys, and it's probably not. Most of it is probably independently not illegal. It's destructive, and if the American people were awake and paying attention, they wouldn't fall for it. But they are falling for it.
They are, and especially in the subject of the environmental movement, there's so much pride in many people who are not, they don't know anything about what we're talking about here today. They don't recognize the attack on the coal industry as actually a political effort by George Soros, an economic effort on his part to ruin the coal industry. And then when the regulators back off and he's bought all the shares or a lot of shares and he becomes wealthy, people aren't aware of that. They think, and this is to me the most insidious element, that there are so many innocent Americans manipulated, thinking that they are doing something good for mankind for the future because they are protecting the environment, and it's all just a rigged game. I find that breathtaking.
Yeah, and it's worse in the rigging. Economic warfare includes, and the Chinese wrote about this in the book Unrestricted Warfare, using environmental movements to take down a nation. And one of the ways they do it is George Soros or someone like him will fund an environmental group that says we want to stop, fracking, or we want to stop construction or development in this region or whatever. And then they will go in and sue the Environmental Protection Agency. They'll sue the EPA. And the EPA wants that suit so that they can settle with them in court, and all the rest of us have to follow the law that was settled from a court case, not from Congress passing a law, but a court case that was really a collusion between the EPA and an environmental group funded by a leftist donor.
Okay, I don't usually like the expression "my head is going to explode," but what you're just saying is so, you just feel like you're just watching the country be manipulated. You're watching what seem to be innocent, well-meaning people standing for their causes and defending. The EPA is supposed to be this, paragon of virtue, standing up for clean air and clean water, and heaven knows we need that. And I don't know how. And what you just described also is relatively complex for people to follow. And people who are busy and they have the kids and their jobs and their lives and schools and get dinner on the table and get the kids doing their homework. They have about a nanosecond a day to focus on politics.
That's why it works. That's why it works. That's why you can stop a $100 million construction project because you found a certain species of frog that was on that property. And so you can literally throw away a $100 million project to protect this tiny frog that they found there. Because if people paid attention, they'd say, that's stupid. Finish the project. Don't take my tax dollars and throw them away that way. So it is counting on ignorance, and it is very complex, but it's very well orchestrated and very well managed.
And it would take a really, I was trying to think about how these issues, you look at this election cycle. Here we are in August of 2016. It's 11 weeks from today, we'll have the presidential election. And if you ask the average person, what are you worried about? What's going to drive your vote? It's certainly security, and the border is kind of tied with security. It's jobs in the economy, and how do we get jobs? What's going to happen? These kind of issues we're talking about, I'm expressing frustration. I don't have an answer, but it's a frustrating thing because these are kind of puppeteers behind the scene manipulating so much of the economy and even of the political conversation, and it's just unseen.
Well, you have news media where they openly, the reporters openly acknowledge that they're in the tank for Hillary Clinton, and they're not ashamed to say that they're absolutely direct and obvious about it. I saw Dan Rather this morning on CNBC, and I thought, how do you show your face after you push those National Guard memos proven to be fake and went after a sitting president? How do you do that? They do it because they have a political agenda and they think it's the right thing to do. They're morally committed to their purpose.
Yeah, that's true. We only have a segment. We have 2 minutes and one more segment here. And I did want to, on today's show, get around a little bit to talking about the idea of what role the average American has in shaping our country's future. It's not just voting in the election, although that is important. It's important to vote in the presidential election and all sorts of elections, but to be engaged on the issues, to understand them enough, and to see, and what we're talking about might be kind of more than a lot of people want to handle, but the simple thing you mentioned a moment ago is really a vital thing, which is keeping and monitoring the media in America, recognizing their agenda. And I'll just give you one little example. You can comment on it, but I thought it was unbelievable that this young man, we're changing subjects here to the Olympics, but this young man who did apparently over-exaggerate was his word, this young swimmer, Ryan Lochte, who did tell, I guess he exaggerated something about an incident that happened as he was down at Rio de Janeiro at the Olympics. So days and days on all sorts of the mainstream media, there were panels on discussing whether he should be permitted to ever participate again in the Olympics and how should he be punished. He's lost all of these endorsements, all of these contracts he had that he was going to be endorser of some product. He's lost all of that hysteria over his lie, which was a lie, and I'm not saying it was okay. But then you contrast it for just a moment for something like President Obama not admitting until he got forced that he paid a ransom to get the Iranian hostages out, or Hillary Clinton continuing day by day to lie about the emails, about Benghazi, about so many things in her life. And somehow we have a media that is just not willing to pursue truth. They're not willing to dig in, pursue the truth, and expose it because they are in the tank. in their ideology on the far left, and there's just not any way that they're going to come around, and especially on environmental issues. They're just not going to come around and press for the truth. So we have a break coming up, but when we come back, I want to talk about a really interesting case that involves our current government, which has to do with climate prosecutors, states attorney generals going to sue companies for saying they don't believe in global warming. I mean, it's like, and the media does almost nothing. And welcome back to Point of View Radio. This is Debbie Georgatos filling in for Kirby Anderson, and I have in studio with me a great guest and a friend, Kevin Freeman. And before the break, I said, and this is our last segment, I really want to spend most of this last segment talking about how Christian thinking and Christian faith can really turn around a lot of things that we face in America if we're willing to step back and see issues in the bigger context. But I said before the break, I just want to plant this seed, and next time I do this show, we may be able to talk about it more. But you may have heard that, and we were talking in the break too about this, you may have heard about how there were several people who hold the level in various states of attorney general. There are state attorneys general. They formed a pact and essentially decided that they were going to subpoena mainly ExxonMobil, but other oil organizations or oil companies, as well as think tanks, to essentially say to those people, you can't say that global warming, man-made global climate change isn't real. You can't say it's a hoax. You can't say it's not a problem. And so these attorneys general want to actually pursue criminal charges against individuals, ExxonMobil, as well as think tanks who dare to challenge leftist ideology about climate change. So that's the bad part, and it's still ongoing. But a good part of it is a good and just fabulous, from the great state of Texas, fabulous chairman of that committee, Congressman Lamar Smith, who's been on my show a bunch of times. I'm not sure if he's been on this show too, I think. But anyway, my show is America Can We Talk? But this radio show, Point of View, I'm not sure he's been on. But basically, Lamar Smith saw it, and he is the chairman. I don't have his committee name in front of me. Yeah, the House. Oh, actually, he's chairman of the House Committee on Science, Space, and Technology. And he issued subpoenas to these attorneys general saying, essentially, I want to see who you're talking to. Who are you getting all this information from that says there's no such thing as climate change? So he's seeking the emails of these state attorneys general, because they've been talking with environmental extremist groups, groups in the far left, trying to gather all their ammo against these think tanks who are trying to speak up and say, that there is a serious question whether man-made global climate change is a problem that the left says it is. So I'm telling you a story that's not solved yet. The state's attorneys general are saying, we don't have to tell you anything. And it's very clear that the Congress does have that authority. And part of all this, talking about just standing up for freedom, as part of all this is that underlying what the attorneys general are saying, and Kevin's going to comment in a second about this, is they're essentially saying to think tanks, to individuals and businesses, you can't say something we don't agree with. And that's a problem with something in the Constitution. Yeah, First
Amendment, right. And one of the things that this is an economic weapon, and our government under the Constitution was not designed to be an economic weapon against people. That's what George Soros has attempted to use it for. That's what the left and the environmentalist movement has attempted to use it for. And it all ties back to what we mentioned earlier. In 1999, two senior colonels of the People's Liberation Army wrote a book titled Unrestricted Warfare, which is a blueprint to take down a superpower. And their goal is to eliminate free speech, to create a racial divide, to create a sexual gender divide, and to break America apart. And they talked about a Russian named Igor Panarin in 1998 talked about how America would collapse and it would go into 5 separate countries. And people laughed when he said it, but we're seeing many of his predictions play out as we speak.
I love that this is obviously Kevin Freeman is extremely well read, and I'm always taking notes when he talks. So I'm going to get all these books he mentioned, but I definitely want to, because you hear a lot of people talking in America today about this is just we've never seen in generations. Really, we haven't seen such unrest in the inner cities. We have Black Lives Matter. Just a lot of people seem to be outraged. We have so much division in America, and I just and it seems or it's presented as though it's just organic. It's just kind of the result of all sorts of forces in society and events and unfairnesses and inequalities, but to see it as something that is playing out what the Chinese wrote about in, what'd you say, 1999?
1999. The KGB wrote about in the 1950s, and we have KGB defectors who came out of the Soviet Union and admitted that these were the plans.
Okay, folks. We're going to turn I want to end on a positive note today. We just have like 4 minutes left. You know, on the subject of the power of listeners to this show, the power of true believing Christians in America to be on duty, to be in your place on duty defending America. I want to just turn and talk about in this election cycle. And again, you know, this show is nonpartisan, but we are in favor of retaining the identity of America as a Christian nation and the values that grow out of that. And so one thing I was going to comment on, this is making the scenes, it's going around on the internet and through their email links that harken back to this statement that was written years ago. It's attributed to the Scottish philosopher Alexander, and I think it's Tytler, Tytler, but basically is talking about the idea. It's a very kind of dark, fatalistic view of America. It's basically saying every democracy goes through a cycle. You know, democracies can only exist until the voters discover they can vote themselves largesse from the public treasury. And other people have said that, but the basic idea of, you know, freedom and the kind of country we have, once you figure out the majority can vote to give for candidates who will promise them the most benefits. And the cycles this guy portrays are from bondage that countries grow and then they collapse again in this series of in this order and cycle. From bondage to spiritual faith, from spiritual faith to great courage, from courage to liberty, from liberty to abundance. Okay, we're good so far. We're getting to the good stuff here. Then it goes on from abundance to selfishness, from selfishness to apathy, from apathy to dependence, and finally from dependency back again into bondage. And the reason this is being circulated is because where we are in 2016, we have a large segment of the American population very, very dependent on the government. We have seemingly people voting themselves more benefits. And it isn't just, I don't mean to allude to just those who are the recipients of government assistance. It's just a generalized thought about the growing dependency on government as being a healthy, good thing. And so contrasting with something, I love this very short passage from Galatians. This I happen to bring with me the King James Version. But this, stand fast, therefore, in the liberty wherewith Christ hath made us free, and be not entangled again with the yoke of bondage. I love that. And so I love to think of ideas. I think of America as a country founded on liberty, and that the Christian spirit needs to stand up and rise up in America and reassert that liberty. I don't know, Kevin, if you have any reaction to that, but I just think that's vital.
Where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is liberty. We've got to cry out to the Lord, ask the Holy Spirit to return to America. We kicked God out of so much of our society and life, and so we need to cry out 2 Chronicles 7:14. And I would also point out Proverbs 27:12. We see a lot of problems down the road. The wise man sees problems down the road and prepares for them. The fool goes blindly on and suffers the consequences. The biggest thing the church has to do is wake up. I remember Keith Green sang a song called Asleep in the Light about the church, and the church has been asleep in the light. It's about to get dark. It's time to wake up.
I love that. Wow. Okay, so he's quoting scripture without, I always bring it and read it, but I just really appreciate everything you just said. Well, folks, you know, with this show, Point of View, it is such a blessing for every one of you listening and for all of America, because it is bringing the biblical view, the Christian view on all sorts of issues that face America. I love when Kirby Anderson, the host of this show, runs through in the commercial or the what starts off the kickoff to the show. He just does a litany of issues and talks about how we talk about them here from the Christian perspective. And I just think there could be no better blessing for America than to have a show like this, hosted by Kirby Anderson, who is he's I don't know what to say about him. He's an exceptional radio host. I think he retains and remembers everything he's ever read. But he's also really brings a loving Christian thought to the challenges we face. So I'm sure he'll be happy when Kirby Anderson's back from his vacation. This is Debbie Georgiadis. I have had a great time filling in on Point of View Radio. Come back every week. Thanks for joining us.